Blood stained the white lace of Lillian Montgomery's wedding dress as she stumbled through the doors of the First Bank of Redemption, Colorado. Her trembling hands clutched a letter that would forever change her life, while behind her, the whispers of townsfolk trailed like smoke from a dying fire. It was 1883, and Lillian had just discovered that everything about her 5-year marriage had been built on quicksand. Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Patterson, the elderly bank manager, rushed from behind his polished oak counter. "Are you injured?" Lillian glanced down at her dress, suddenly aware of the crimson bloom spreading across her bodice. "It's not my blood," she whispered, her voice hollow as a dry well. "It's Thomas's." The bank fell silent as if the very air had been sucked from the room. Thomas Montgomery had been one of Redemption's most respected citizens, a businessman who transformed their small mining town with investments and promised prosperity. He was also Lillian's husband. Or had been, until approximately 1 hour ago when she discovered him in their bedroom with a bullet in his chest. "I need to see the accounts," Lillian said, her voice steadier than her heart. "All of them." Mr. Patterson hesitated, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Perhaps we should wait for the sheriff, Mrs. Montgomery." "No," Lillian straightened her spine, ignoring the way her corset dug into her ribs. "Thomas is dead, Mr. Patterson, shot by a man who claimed my husband owed him money, a great deal of money." She unfolded the letter in her hands, revealing elegant script that detailed gambling debts and failed investments all hidden from her. "I need to know what's left." As it turned out, there was nothing left. Thomas Montgomery had gambled away every penny they owned, mortgaged their home twice over, and borrowed from men whose businesses operated far outside the law. The man who'd killed him was merely the first debt collector to arrive. Lillian knew there would be others. By sunset, Sheriff James Calloway had ruled Thomas's death the result of business disagreements, and Lillian found herself standing before the home she'd lovingly tended for 5 years, now legally belonging to the bank. The sheriff, a kind but practical man in his 50s, stood beside her, hat in hand. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Montgomery, truly I am." His gray mustache twitched with genuine regret. "But the debts are clear. Thomas left you with nothing but his name, and even that's tarnished now." Lillian clutched her single carpet bag containing the few possessions she'd been allowed to keep. "What am I to do, Sheriff? I have no family, no money. The widow Jenkins takes in boarders," he offered, "but her rates aren't cheap." Or, he hesitated. "The Lucky Star Saloon is looking for girls." The implication hung in the air between them. Lillian's cheeks burned with humiliation. From respected wife to potential saloon girl in a single day. "I'll find my own way," she said with more confidence than she felt. The next morning found Lillian on the eastbound stage, her ticket purchased with the sale of her wedding ring, the last valuable thing she owned. Thomas had promised her the moon and stars when he'd placed it on her finger. Now she knew those promises had been as empty as her future. The stagecoach bounced along the rough mountain roads, carrying Lillian and 5 other passengers toward Silver Creek, a town 40 miles east. She'd heard there was work there, perhaps as a seamstress or a teacher. She had education enough, having taught school before her marriage. "First time traveling alone, madam." The young man seated across from her tipped his hat politely. His clothes marked him as a cowhand-worn boots, practical denim, and a shirt that had seen better days but had been carefully mended. "Is it that obvious?" Lillian attempted a smile. "Only because you're clutching that bag like it might sprout wings." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Jack Dawson, madam, heading to the Carson Ranch near Silver Creek, Lillian Montgomery." She hesitated before adding, "Widow Montgomery as of yesterday." Something in Jack's expression shifted, not pity, which she'd come to expect, but a quiet understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Montgomery." The coach hit a particularly deep rut, sending Lillian lurching forward. Jack's hand shot out, steadying her before she could tumble from her seat. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her arm. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." "Just Jack, madam. I'm not much for formalities." For the first time since discovering Thomas's body, Lillian felt something other than fear and shame. It was small, just a flicker of warmth in the midst of her despair, but it was there. The stage arrived in Silver Creek just as afternoon was fading into evening. The town was larger than Redemption, with a proper hotel and several businesses lining the main street. Lillian stepped down from the coach, uncertain of her next move. Her funds would cover perhaps 2 nights at the hotel and then, Mrs. Montgomery. Jack stood beside her, hat in hand. "If you're looking for work, my boss's wife might be able to help, Mrs. Carson runs the ranch house and was just saying she needs an extra pair of hands." Lillian studied him, searching for ulterior motives in his kind offer. Thomas had taught her well that men's generosity usually came with hidden costs. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Jack seemed taken aback by her directness. "Because you look like you could use it," he said simply. "And because my ma raised me to believe that folks should help each other when times get hard." There was something in his straightforward gaze that made Lillian want to trust him. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was the way he looked at her not as damaged goods or a potential conquest, but as a person deserving of basic kindness. "I would be grateful for the introduction," she said finally. The Carson Ranch sprawled across 1,000 acres of rolling grassland east of Silver Creek. The main house was modest, but well-maintained, with a wide porch and smoking chimney that promised warmth inside. Martha Carson proved to be a plump, energetic woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that Lillian immediately respected. "So you need work and a roof," Martha said after Jack made the introductions and discreetly withdrew. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. So, quite well." "Handle accounts," Lillian hesitated. "I can, though my husband preferred to manage our finances himself." The bitter irony of that statement wasn't lost on her. Martha's shrewd eyes missed nothing. "I heard about Thomas Montgomery even out here. His investments went bad all over the territory." She paused. "Did you know?" "Not until yesterday," Lillian admitted, fighting back the hot sting of tears. "When a man shot him in our bedroom and informed me that our home and everything in it now belonged to someone else." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Well, you're not the first woman whose husband left her with nothing but trouble, and you won't be the last. I need help running this house and keeping the books. Room, board, and $10 a month. It's not much, but it's honest work." Relief washed over Lillian like a cool rain after drought. "I accept, Mrs. Carson, gratefully." "Martha," the older woman corrected, "we don't stand on ceremony here. Jack will show you to the bunkhouse. You'll have the small room at the end. It's separate from the men's quarters." As promised, Jack escorted Lillian to a long, low building behind the main house. "The boys are decent enough," he explained as they walked. "Most have been with the Carsons for years. They won't bother you." "And you?" Lillian asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of her question. Jack's step faltered briefly. "I've been here 3 years, Mrs. Montgomery. Came west after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back. The Carsons gave me a chance when no one else would." "You fought in the war." Lillian studied him with new interest. He couldn't be much older than her 25 years. "Joined up in 63. I was young and stupid, thought it would be an adventure." His expression darkened momentarily. It wasn't. Lillian had known many men who returned from the war, changed some visibly with missing limbs or scars, others with wounds that couldn't be seen but ran just as deep. Jack seemed to carry his memories with quiet dignity rather than bitter resentment. "Well, I'm grateful for your kindness today, Mr. Dawson." "Jack," she corrected herself. "It's nothing," he said, but the smile that accompanied his words lit his eyes in a way that made Lillian's heart beat a little faster. "We all need a helping hand sometimes." Life at the Carson Ranch quickly settled into a routine that brought Lillian unexpected comfort. She rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent mornings organizing the household accounts, which, to her satisfaction, she found she had a genuine talent for, and afternoons tending to mending and other domestic tasks. The work was hard but honest, and each night she fell into bed pleasantly exhausted rather than emotionally drained. 2 weeks after her arrival, Lillian received word that Thomas's creditors had claimed everything from their home in Redemption. Nothing remained of her former life, not her books, her mother's china, not even the quilt her grandmother had made for her wedding. The news should have devastated her, But instead, Lillian found herself oddly relieved. The last ties to Thomas and his web of lies had been severed. That evening, she sat on the bunkhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Jack approach until he spoke. "Mind if I join you?" Lillian shifted to make room on the step. "Please." He settled beside her, close enough that she could smell the leather and hay that clung to his clothes. "Beautiful evening." "It is." Lillian drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I received news from Redemption today. Thomas's creditors have taken everything. There's nothing left of my old life." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Is that good news or bad?" The question surprised her. Most people would have immediately offered sympathy or platitudes. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "It feels like freedom in a way. As if I can finally stop being Mrs. Thomas Montgomery and just be Lillian again." "And who is Lillian?" Jack asked, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. The question caught her off guard. Who was she really? For 5 years, she'd been defined by her role as Thomas's wife. Before that, she'd been a daughter, a teacher roles assigned to her by circumstance rather than choice. "I don't know," she said finally. "I suppose I'm finding out." Jack nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. "Well, from what I've seen, Lillian is someone who works hard, treats people kindly, and doesn't complain even when she has every right to." He stood, offering her his hand. "And she's someone who deserves a fresh start." His fingers were warm around hers as he helped her to her feet. The simple contact sent a flutter through her stomach that Lillian immediately tried to suppress. She was a widow of barely a month, her reputation in tatters. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a cowboy, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his manner. "Thank you, Jack," she said, withdrawing her hand perhaps too quickly. "Good night." If he noticed her sudden retreat, he didn't comment on it. "Good night, Lillian." As autumn settled over the Colorado territory, Lillian's role at the ranch expanded. Martha, recognizing her education, asked her to teach basic reading and arithmetic to some of the younger ranch hands during the quiet evening hours. Several of the men, including the cook's assistant and 2 stable hands, had never had formal schooling and eagerly embraced the opportunity to learn. Jack often joined these impromptu lessons, though Lillian soon discovered he was already well-read. "My mother was a schoolteacher," he explained one evening as they sat by the fire after the others had retired. "She made sure I knew my letters before I knew my way around a horse." "She must be very proud of you," Lillian said. A shadow crossed Jack's face. "She passed during the war, influenza." He stared into the flames. "I was in Virginia when it happened, didn't get word until months later. I'm sorry." Lillian hesitated, then added, "My parents died when I was 18. Wagon accident. He was kind to me then." Despite everything, she couldn't deny that. "He helped me when I had no one else." "Is that why you married him?" The question was direct but not unkind. Lillian considered it honestly. "Partly. He was charming and successful, and I was young and alone. I thought I loved him." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Perhaps I did for a time, but now I wonder if I ever really knew him at all." Jack studied her for a long moment. "It takes courage to start over. Or desperation," Lillian countered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Lillian found herself increasingly aware of Jack's presence, the way firelight caught in his dark hair, how his hands moved when he spoke of things that excited him, the deep rumble of his laugh. It had been a long time since she'd simply enjoyed a man's company without the weight of expectation or performance. As Halloween approached, Martha announced plans for a harvest celebration at the ranch. "Nothing fancy," she assured everyone, "just good food and maybe some dancing. The boys work hard all year, they deserve a little fun before winter sets in." The prospect of a party sent a ripple of excitement through the ranch. The hands spoke of little else during mealtimes, and Martha threw herself into planning with gusto. Lillian found herself assigned to making decorations and helping prepare special dishes for the feast. 2 days before the celebration, a package arrived for her from Silver Creek's general store. Inside, she found a dress of deep blue calico with a note in Martha's handwriting. "Every woman needs something pretty to wear when she dances. Consider it an advance on your wages. Tears pricked Lillian's eyes as she held the simple but lovely dress against herself. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such thoughtfulness. In the last years of her marriage, Thomas had given her expensive gifts, certainly jewelry and fine clothes that she now recognized were meant to display his wealth rather than please her, but nothing chosen with such personal care. The night of the party arrived crisp and clear, with a full moon rising over the eastern plains. Lanterns hung from the barn rafters, casting a warm glow over trestle tables laden with food. Someone had brought a fiddle, and one of the older hands contributed a harmonica. The music was simple but lively, and soon the packed earth floor of the barn became an impromptu dance area. Lillian stood at the edge of the gathering, smoothing nervous hands over her new dress. She'd pinned her hair up in a simple style, with a few curls framing her face. The effect was modest but flattering, at least according to her small mirror. "You look beautiful." She turned to find Jack standing behind her, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from washing. He looked different outside of his work clothes, younger perhaps, or simply more relaxed. "Thank you." Lillian felt a blush creep up her neck. "Martha's kindness, not my doing." "The dress is nice," Jack agreed, "but that's not what I meant." Before Lillian could respond, Martha appeared, practically shoving a plate of food into her hands. "Eat, you're too thin." And Jack, stop standing there like a fence post. "Ask the lady to dance before someone else does." Jack's ears reddened, but he extended his hand with a smile. "Mrs. Carson gives good advice. Would you care to dance, Lillian?" The music had shifted to a waltz, slower and more intimate than the reels that had come before. Lillian hesitated only briefly before setting her plate aside and placing her hand in his. "I'd like that very much." Jack led her to the center of the floor, one hand resting lightly at her waist while the other held hers. He moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. "You dance well," Lillian observed as they circled the floor. "My mother insisted." Said a man should know how to dance properly even if he never sets foot in a ballroom. His smile turned wistful. "She'd have liked you." The simple statement warmed Lillian more than it should have. "I think I would have liked her too." They danced in comfortable silence for a few moments, the fiddle's sweet notes filling the air around them. Lillian was acutely aware of Jack's hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap that clung to him, the way his eyes never left her face. "People are watching us," she murmured, noticing the speculative glances from others around the barn. "Let them." Jack's voice was low, meant for her alone. "I'm not ashamed to be seen dancing with the prettiest woman at the party." Lillian nearly missed a step. "Jack, I'm a widow. My husband's debts ruined people all over the territory. My reputation, your husband's actions aren't yours," he interrupted firmly. "And anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." The music ended, but Jack didn't immediately release her. For a heartbeat, they stood close enough that Lillian could feel the warmth of him, could see the question in his eyes that he was too respectful to voice. The moment was broken by Martha calling for everyone's attention to announce that the pumpkin pies were being served. Jack stepped back, his hand lingering on hers for just a second longer than necessary. "Thank you for the dance," Lillian said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure." His smile made her heart flutter in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I hope it won't be the last." It wasn't. As the evening progressed, Jack sought her out for 2 more dances, and they shared pie at one of the tables, talking and laughing with ease. By the time the party began to wind down near midnight, Lillian realized she hadn't thought of Thomas or her troubles once in hours. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she had simply been happy. As they walked back toward the bunkhouse under a star-filled sky, Jack offered Lillian his arm. "May I see you safely to your door?" "Such gallantry," she teased, but slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow nonetheless. "My ma would haunt me if I didn't mind my manners." His voice was light, but there was an undercurrent of something else, a tension that hadn't been there earlier. They reached her door too quickly. Lillian turned to face him, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "I had a wonderful time tonight. So did I." Jack seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "Lillian, I don't want to presume or push where I'm not wanted. You've been through more than anyone should have to face alone, and the last thing you need is Jack." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "You've been nothing but kind and respectful. You don't need to apologize for that. It's not that." He took a deep breath. "The thing is, I care for you. More than I should, maybe, given how short a time you've been here, but I do, and I wouldn't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your situation." Lillian's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I don't think that." "Good." He smiled, relief evident in his features. "Because I'd like to court you properly when you're ready, if you ever are." The offer hung between them, sincere and without pressure. Lillian thought of Thomas, of the whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet and ultimately left her broken. Jack was offering something different, something built on friendship and mutual respect rather than grand gestures and empty promises. "I'm not ready yet," she admitted. "But I think someday I could be." Jack's smile was worth every ounce of courage it had taken to speak those words. "Someday is good enough for me. I'm a patient man, Lillian Montgomery." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent a shiver down her spine. "Good night. Good night, Jack." As she closed her door behind her, Lillian leaned against it, her fingers tracing the spot his lips had touched. For the first time since Thomas's death, the future didn't look like an empty road stretching into nothingness. There was a possibility there, a spark of something that might, with care and time, grow into something beautiful. Winter descended on the Colorado plains with characteristic swiftness. One day the skies were clear and the air crisp. The next, snow blanketed the land in white silence. Life on the ranch slowed to a different rhythm. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, the hands spent more time repairing equipment and less on the range, and evenings stretched long around the fireside. Lillian's teaching sessions became more popular as the dark hours lengthened. Even some of the older hands who had initially scoffed at book learning began to attend, if only for the company and warmth of the main house's sitting room. Jack was a constant presence, sometimes helping the newer readers, sometimes simply watching Lillian with quiet admiration that made her cheeks warm despite her best efforts to maintain professional composure. True to his word, Jack was patient. He never pushed for more than Lillian was ready to give, but his attention was steadfast. He brought her wildflowers he found on the rare warm days, carved a beautiful wooden box for her sewing supplies, and always made time to talk with her, whether about books they both had read or simply the events of the day. As Christmas approached, Martha announced plans for another celebration. "Nothing extravagant," she insisted, though the gleam in her eye suggested otherwise. "Just family." The word caught Lillian by surprise. Family. She hadn't had one of those in years, not a real one. Thomas had been an only child, his parents long dead, and he'd kept her isolated from forming close friendships in redemption. Somehow, without her noticing, the people of Carson Ranch had become the family she'd been missing. On Christmas Eve, snow fell in fat, lazy flakes as everyone gathered in the main house. There was a tree cut from the foothills, decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments that Lillian had helped the youngest ranch hand's children make. Presents were exchanged, simple things, mostly handmade, but given with genuine affection. Jack's gift to Lillian was a book of poetry, Tennyson, bound in worn leather. "It was my mother's," he explained quietly as she ran her fingers over the faded gilt lettering. "I thought you might like it." The trust implied by such a gift, something so personal, so connected to his past, moved Lillian deeply. "Jack, I can't accept this. It's too precious. That's why I want you to have it." His eyes, warm in the firelight, held her steadily. "Because it matters to me, like you do." Lillian's gift to him seemed inadequate by comparison, a hand-knitted scarf in dark blue wool. But Jack received it as if she'd given him gold. He immediately wrapped it around his neck, declaring it the finest scarf in the territory. Later, as the celebration wound down and people began drifting toward their beds, Jack asked Lillian to step outside with him for a moment. The snow had stopped, leaving the world transformed into a glittering wonderland under a clear sky blazing with stars. "I wanted to give you something else," Jack said, reaching into his pocket. "Something private." Lillian's heart skipped as he withdrew a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "Jack, you've already been too generous." "It's nothing fancy," he assured her, "just something I made." Carefully, she unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden heart, polished to a smooth shine and attached to a leather cord. The carving was simple but beautiful, with delicate scrollwork around the edges. "I know you're still healing," Jack said softly. "And I meant what I said about being patient, but I wanted you to know that whenever you're ready, my heart is yours." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes as she closed her fingers around the wooden heart. No one had ever offered her something so honest, so free of manipulation or hidden agendas. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "May I kiss you, Lillian, just once?" The question, asked with such respect for her boundaries, was her undoing. Lillian nodded, unable to find her voice. Jack's lips were warm against the winter chill, his touch gentle as he cupped her face between his hands. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise rather than a demand, a beginning rather than an end. When they parted, Lillian saw her own wonder reflected in Jack's eyes. "Merry Christmas, Lillian," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, Jack." That night, lying in her narrow bed with the wooden heart clutched in her hand, Lillian allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Jack Dawson. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Thomas's betrayal had left scars that still ached, but Jack was slowly showing her that not all men were the same, that trust given to the right person wasn't foolishness. January brought bitter cold and news that changed everything. A letter arrived from a lawyer in Denver, addressed to Mrs. Lillian Montgomery. Martha brought it to her with curious eyes but didn't pry. Lillian opened it with trembling fingers, half expecting more bad news about Thomas's debts. Instead, she found something entirely unexpected. Her late husband, it seemed, had taken out a substantial life insurance policy shortly after their marriage, one his creditors couldn't touch. The lawyer explained that it had taken some time to process due to the circumstances of Thomas's death, but the company had finally agreed to honor the policy. The sum listed made Lillian's head spin. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start over, to build a life of her own choosing. She could go anywhere, do anything, open a small business perhaps, or return to teaching in a proper school. She sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the letter. Freedom, real freedom, not just from Thomas's debts, but from financial worry altogether. It was what she'd dreamed of during those dark days after his death. So why did the prospect suddenly fill her with such uncertainty? The answer came to her as she watched Jack through her window, leading his horse across the snowy yard. The life she wanted was no longer defined by escape from her past, but by the possibility of a future one that included the tall cowboy with gentle hands and a steadfast heart. Lillian didn't immediately tell anyone about the letter. She needed time to think, to decide what this new development meant for her plans. February arrived with a brief thaw that turned the ranch into a sea of mud and made everyone restless for spring. It was during this false spring that trouble arrived at Carson Ranch. Lillian was working on accounts in the main house when she heard the commotion, horses in the yard, men's voices raised in argument. She went to the window and saw 3 well-dressed strangers confronting Mr. Carson, while several ranch hands, including Jack, stood nearby with wary expressions. Martha came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Land speculators," she said with disgust. "They've been sniffing around ever since the railroad announced plans to lay track through the valley." Lillian watched as Mr. Carson firmly but politely sent the men on their way. Jack's posture remained tense until the strangers had ridden out of sight, and she noticed his hand never strayed far from the revolver at his hip. That evening, the mood at dinner was subdued. Mr. Carson explained that the men had offered to buy the ranch for a considerable sum. "Railroad's coming whether we like it or not," he said, passing potatoes to his wife. "These fellows want to build a town where our north pasture sits. You're not considering it, surely?" Martha looked alarmed. "Course not." Mr. Carson's weathered face creased in a smile. "This land's been Carson land for 30 years. It'll stay that way." Later, as Lillian and Jack walked back to the bunkhouse together, she asked, "Are land speculators common around here?" Jack's expression darkened. "Getting more so. The railroads bring them like flies to honey. They buy up land cheap from folks who don't know any better, then sell it at 10 times the price once the tracks are laid. Those men today didn't look like they'd take no for an answer easily. They won't. Jack glanced back toward the main house. The Carsons need to be careful. Some of these speculators play dirty when they don't get their way. His concern proved prophetic. 3 days later, a mysterious fire broke out in the barn. The ranch hands managed to save the horses and most of the equipment, but the structure itself was badly damaged. Could have been an accident, Mr. Carson said as they surveyed the charred timbers the next morning, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Jack knelt to examine something on the ground, then stood with a grim expression. "Coal oil," he said, holding up a broken bottle neck. This was deliberate. Sheriff Miller rode out from Silver Creek to investigate, but without witnesses, there was little he could do besides take statements and promise to keep an eye out for the speculators if they returned to town. After he left, Mr. Carson called the hands together. "I need extra watches on the property," he announced. 2 men at a time, rotating shifts. Anyone sees strangers on Carson land, you fire a warning shot and call for help. The atmosphere at the ranch changed overnight. The easy camaraderie became watchful vigilance. Jack worked dawn to dusk, helping rebuild the barn, falling into bed exhausted each night. Lillian missed their conversations, their quiet moments together, but understood the necessity. One evening, as she brought coffee to the men working late on the barn's new roof, she found Jack alone, measuring boards by lantern light. "You should rest," she said, handing him a steaming cup. "You've been working yourself to exhaustion." Jack accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "Someone needs to finish the roofing before that storm hits." He nodded toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Someone doesn't always have to be you." Lillian sat beside him on a stack of lumber. "The others worry about you pushing yourself too hard." "The others, huh?" His tired eyes crinkled at the corners. "And me," she admitted. "I worry too." Jack set his coffee aside and took her hand. His palm was rough with new blisters and healing cuts. "I need to keep the ranch safe, to keep you safe." "Jack." Lillian hesitated, then decided it was time for honesty. "I received some news a few weeks ago. Thomas had a life insurance policy. I have options now. I could leave, start fresh somewhere else." She felt him stiffen beside her, though he didn't release her hand. "I see." His voice was carefully neutral. "That's good news for you. You deserve a fresh start." "That's just it." Lillian turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what a fresh start really means. For so long, I thought it meant running from everything connected to Thomas. But now I realize it's not about where I go, but what I choose for myself." She took a deep breath. "And I choose you, Jack, if you'll still have me." For a moment, he simply stared at her as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not his usual quick grin, but something deeper, more profound. "Lillian Montgomery," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been yours since the day you stepped off that stagecoach." He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. This wasn't the hesitant Christmas kiss or the respectful courtship they'd been slowly building. This was a man laying his heart bare, offering everything he had without reservation. When they finally parted, Lillian rested her forehead against his. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "After Thomas, I swore I'd never trust a man again, never let myself be vulnerable, but you." She traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "You never once made me feel like I was less than whole." "Because you're not," Jack said firmly. "You never were. What happened with Thomas was his failing, not yours. You're more than enough, Lillian. You always have been." The simple words unlocked something inside her, a pain she'd been carrying since finding Thomas's body, since learning of his betrayals and deceptions. She'd blamed herself, deep down, for not seeing the truth sooner, for being naive enough to believe in a man who had used her as nothing more than a respectable front for his schemes. Jack held her as she cried, not trying to stop her tears, but simply providing an anchor in the storm. When the worst had passed, he pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you," he said quietly. "I think I've loved you since that first day on the stagecoach when you were trying so hard to be brave." Lillian looked up at him through damp lashes. "I love you too, Jack Dawson, and that terrifies me." "Good," he smiled. The best things in life usually do. Their newfound understanding gave Lillian courage. The next day, she asked to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Carson privately. She explained about the insurance money and her decision to stay in the area, then made them a proposition. She would invest in rebuilding the barn and adding improvements to the ranch in exchange for a small partnership. "The railroad is coming," she acknowledged. "But instead of fighting it, we could prepare for it. Expand the ranch's operations, perhaps add a small hotel for travelers. I have some experience with business accounting thanks to cleaning up Thomas's affairs." The Carsons exchanged surprised looks. "You're serious about staying," Martha said, studying Lillian's face. "Very serious," Lillian confirmed, her cheeks warming slightly. "I've found something here worth building a future around." Martha's knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what, or rather who, that something was. "Well, Henry," she said to her husband, "I always said we needed new blood and fresh ideas around here." Mr. Carson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "A hotel, you say, might work at that. Keep the speculators from getting a foothold while bringing in new business." He extended his hand to Lillian. "Partner," spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new possibilities. The rebuilt barn was stronger than before. Plans for a small hotel near the future railroad station were underway, and Lillian found herself busier and happier than she'd ever been. She and Jack were married on a perfect May morning, with the Carsons and all the ranch hands in attendance. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, held beneath an arch of flowering branches beside the creek that gave the nearby town its name. Lillian wore a dress of pale blue silk, a far cry from the elaborate white lace of her first wedding, but infinitely more suited to the woman she had become. Jack, clean-shaven and nervous in a new suit, watched her approach with such undisguised adoration that several of the tough ranch hands were seen to wipe suspiciously at their eyes. "I ain't much for flowery speeches," Jack said when it came time for their vows, his voice steady despite his nerves. "But I promise you this, Lillian. I will be honest with you always. I will respect you as my equal. I will work every day to be worthy of your trust, and I will love you until they lay me in the ground, and after that too, if such things are possible." Lillian, who had prepared careful vows of her own, found she couldn't remember a single word of them through her tears. Instead, she spoke from her heart. "When I came here, I was broken. I thought Thomas had taken everything from me: my home, my security, my ability to trust. But you showed me that what matters can't be taken away. You saw me when I was at my lowest and still thought I was enough." She squeezed his hands tightly in hers. "I promise to love you with everything I am, Jack Dawson, to build a life with you that's based on truth and mutual respect. To be your partner in all things. And to remember every day that love isn't about grand gestures or empty promises, it's about choosing each other, again and again, through whatever life brings." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering, as they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that represented not ownership but partnership. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and more goodwill than Lillian had thought possible after the darkness of the previous year. As the sun began to set, painting the plains in gold and crimson, Jack led her away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the creek. "Happy?" he asked, his arm warm around her waist. Lillian leaned into him, watching the water catch the last light of day. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because this is just the beginning, Mrs. Dawson." The name, her new name, chosen rather than inherited, felt right in a way Lillian couldn't quite explain. "I like the sound of that. So do I." Jack turned her gently to face him. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet pouch. Inside was a locket of silver, intricately engraved with flowers and vines. When Lillian opened it, she found a tiny daguerreotype of Jack on one side. The other side was empty. "I thought," he said, suddenly shy, "that someday we might put a picture of our children there, if you want children, that is." Tears blurred Lillian's vision as she closed the locket in her palm. "I do," she whispered, "very much." Jack's smile was radiant as he fastened the chain around her neck. The locket nestled against her heart, a promise of the future they would build together. "I love you, Lillian Dawson," he said, drawing her close. And I love you, Jack Dawson." Lillian wrapped her arms around his neck, marveling at how natural it felt to be held by him, to belong with him. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Thank you for being brave enough to try again," he answered, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. Over the following years, the Carson Ranch prospered and grew. The railroad came as predicted, bringing change but also opportunity. The small hotel Lillian had envisioned became a reality, a comfortable establishment known for its clean rooms and excellent meals, managed primarily by Lillian, while Jack continued working the ranch with Mr. Carson. Their first child, a daughter they named Mary after Jack's mother, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James, who from his earliest days showed a gift for charming everyone he met. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Martha Carson passed peacefully in her sleep after seeing the ranch flourish for another decade. Her husband followed within the year, leaving the ranch to Jack and Lillian as the partners he'd come to consider them. Through it all, Jack and Lillian faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing season. The wooden heart he'd given her that first Christmas hung in a place of honor in their bedroom, a reminder of beginnings and promises kept. On their 10th anniversary, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, now their house, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "Any regrets?" Jack asked, his hand warm around hers. There was silver threading through his dark hair now, and the years of outdoor work had etched fine lines around his eyes, but he looked at her with the same devotion as always. Lillian thought about the long, winding road that had brought her here, the pain and loss, the fear and uncertainty, but also the joy and love she'd found when she least expected it. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Because sometimes, she had learned, what seemed like an ending was really just the beginning of a better story.